policies. The wall is another big one that is another topic of conversation, especially the legislators in the areas back home, like where I'm from. They're against it, and they know that it's not going to make a difference, that it won't help anything. It's right in our backyard, and we know that that's not going to help in that way. And so there's just a lot of things that, in terms of immigration, that have affected us here and that we see playing out after this, this legislative session and just in general. And I know that we're going to continue to see this play out, and we're just trying to make sure that we get as many, elected officials in there that are going to fight for immigrants and come to a real solution.
Besides immigration, are there other issues that you think people are really focused on right now?
There are so many, really. I mean, I think, Texas is so big and diverse that issues are more important in some area. But I think some of the ones that we hear a lot about, of course, healthcare, that's always a big issue for us. And just having so many people that are uninsured here, just seeing like this flu season has been so horrible, and I think a lot of the deaths that have happened could have been prevented, if there was healthcare. And you see a lot of the candidates that are running that are, pushing for universal healthcare, which is really great to see. And I think that the other issue that's always pretty high on our in terms of like importance is education. Our schools here are, terribly underfunded. You have teachers that have to work 2 jobs to make it. And they're having to buy their own, school supplies for their students and for their classrooms. And that shouldn't happen. That shouldn't be something that they have to do. I was actually having a conversation with the teacher recently about how they didn't have enough, or they didn't have any of their AP economic book. And it's just, those are things that just should not happen. These students need those books to, they have to take a test at the end of the year. And if they get a certain score, they get college credit. And not having the books is just, it's unacceptable. And so I think that those are some of the issues that we see a lot of people worried about. Of course, the social justice issues, women's health is incredibly important, and that here in Texas is not something that our legislature is doesn't support very often. And so we're just working to make sure that we get people elected that are going to fight for those things that are important to everyday Texans.
Well, I'm very encouraged that you guys are doing the work that you're doing, and that you're seeing a lot of enthusiasm around voters. I'm really hopeful that, if not in 2018, that very soon we'll see Texas as a blue state. And I think it's game over for presidential politics once that happens.
Yeah, it'll be exciting to see us, become a battleground state, and that's what we're working towards.
All right. Well, thank you so much. This has been really enlightening and heartening, I think.
Well, thank y'all so much for having me. It was great to talk with y'all.
Yeah, you too.
Welcome back, listeners. With us for this segment is Lucy Stein. She's the Advocacy Director at Progress Texas. Welcome, Lucy.
Thanks for having me.
So could you tell us a little bit about Progress Texas, what you guys do?
Yeah, so we're a nonprofit advocacy and digital communications organization. We focus on a lot of issue-based campaigns in Texas. So that's everything from reproductive rights to economic inequality. And obviously during an election year, we focus a lot of our efforts on making sure that we have good progressives on the ballot at the top of the ticket and on down to local races. We do a lot of work with voter guides and some digital organizing to about the vote in Texas, because as I don't know if anybody else has said it to y'all, but we don't consider Texas a red state. It's a non-voting state. So, the more we can get people engaged on the issues that matter to them and make that connection to the ballot box, the better it is for the future of our state. That's what we do at Progress.
Cool. Can you tell us a little bit about specifically how you do your get out the vote efforts? What sorts of things do you do?
Yeah, again, we don't have like a field operation. We're a pretty small organization. So we put a lot of our resources into some pretty cool like digital ways to encourage people to vote. We've run some tests in previous election cycles using social pressure and YouTube ads. And have found that to be pretty effective. We've run some controlled tests. This year, our program's going to be a little bit more comprehensive. We're actually launching some voter guides and sort of engagement material during the primary, which we haven't really in the past gotten involved in to a huge extent as we will this cycle. That has to do with the fact that we have a lot more competitive races this year and a lot of interest in running. So we're seeing across the state a huge number of people filing to run for office, which is incredible. And we're trying to seize on that opportunity to really elevate these good progressives that are championing the issues that we know the majority of Texans care about and sort of pivoting that into a general election strategy that is going to focus on uplifting the good progressives in the fight. And also we have Ted Cruz on the ballot in November. And so we will be launching a campaign targeting Ted Cruz. It's called Humans Against Ted Cruz. We've had a couple of soft launch events and people seem to really like it because we think that his presence on the ballot is going to be an incredible mobilization tool for us. Yeah, we're excited for these electoral projects to sort of be rolled out and used as mobilization and engagement tools.
I know you had said that you're looking to find good progressive candidates who have policies on issues that Texans care about. What are some of those issues that Texans are really concerned about right now?
Yeah, so we've been living in a state where basically every basic right has been under attack by the current sort of political regime, for lack of a better word. So that's everything from our right to vote, our right to access basic health care. Texas did not expand Medicaid to LGBTQ equality. We saw a legislative session where they spent more time talking about what bathrooms people can use as opposed to whether our schools have adequate funding. All of these issues, whether it's education and making sure college is affordable, making sure our public schools are well funded, to, standing up and protecting a woman's right to access abortion care, which is something that we're seeing under attack from every angle at every moment in Texas. So those are some of the things that we want a good candidate to not only be talking about, but also asserting a really proactive plan to fight back against these things and to put forward a vision for what the state can be, which is a place where the economy works for everybody, where, we're not leaving people behind and that we're not imposing policies that unduly restrict people's lives.
So can we talk about women's health a little bit? I've heard a lot that Texas has been historically a not great place for women's health in general. I think, healthcare in Texas as a whole is a complicated thing to think about with such an enormous state with people living all over the state, but especially in terms of women's health and in terms of access to maternal medicine, access to abortions. What does that look like in Texas right now, and where are the points where it's really problematic and affecting people's lives?
Yeah, so the picture is pretty bleak in Texas right now. We have the highest maternal mortality rate. I know that the United States doesn't have the great distinction of being super great on that front right now, but Texas is the highest in the developed world, I believe. So women are quite literally dying, and there are a myriad of reasons why that's the case. But what has happened at the state level when it comes to this sort of crusade against abortion, and that by proxy has come down to the defunding of Planned Parenthood, which Texas has the dubious distinction of being at the forefront of. Before that conversation was happening nationally, Texas was the testing ground for that. So as early as 2011, the state basically kicked Planned Parenthood out of the women's health program, and the state's own data has shown that over the last 6 years, women's health outcomes have declined. They're servicing less women. There are more Medicaid births. Yeah, I mean, just like on every metric, the situation can be directly attached to the fact that the state is going after a healthcare provider because they also provide abortions. And on the abortion front, that's not the only thing they've done. Every session, they've come back and introduced dozens of restrictions that just pile on top of what we've already have in this state, which is, I think almost 20 restrictions on the books already. So this last legislative session, for instance, they came back with a fetal burial law requirement that private insurance can't cover abortion and some other really awful things. Ban on the most commonly used second trimester procedure. So it's not like they're sort of taking a step back and sort of assessing the damage they've already done to this network of family planning and women's health clinics, but they're actively trying to make the situation worse. Mm-hmm. I mean, so that means that the landscape for reproductive health care in the state is not anywhere what it should be and is just getting worse and worse. It's pretty bleak. We know, and I think that a lot of what we do is we work in coalition with a lot of amazing organizations that are doing amazing organizing on the ground with communities that are being truly impacted by these restrictions, right? Because when it comes to abortion, like a wealthy person living in a major metro area is, always going to be able to access that care. It's just the barriers that are put disproportionately impact low-income women, people of color, people living in South Texas. So there, I mean, again, I'm making an even bleaker picture, but all of this is to say that there is a groundswell of amazing activism that we're seeing, and I really think that will translate into the electoral victories that we need to achieve in order to impact the policies of this state. And I think that people know that we can't make change in the state until we elect the right people. So that is what we're focused on right now.
And how does that intersect with immigration and immigrant rights? Texas has the largest population in the country of undocumented immigrants. I assume that any of these problems that women face with healthcare are just multiplied exponentially for women who are undocumented, who are worried about coming anywhere, coming to a hospital, making themselves known. Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. So that adds sort of another layer to the barriers that people are facing. So we have a state that's not only hostile toward women in general, but this last legislative session, they came in and passed one of the most racist anti-immigrant laws that we've seen anywhere in the country, Senate Bill 4, which is basically like the Texas version of a show me your papers law. So not only does that instill fear in communities that already are struggling with access to basic care, and that includes, the full spectrum of reproductive health care, but you're really, instilling fear in this community that already is struggling with access as it is. And then the intersection with access to reproductive health is particularly acute. So when you had all these clinics close as the result of the defunding of Planned Parenthood, that was compounded with the fact that Texas passed in 2013 one of the most restrictive anti-abortion bills in the country that closed half the state's abortion clinics. And it's not like the Supreme Court eventually struck down that, but it's not like clinics will be able to reopen necessarily. So what you have is there was a period of time where for women in the Valley, Texas is a huge state, right? Women that were living in the southern part of Texas, there was no clinic anywhere in those communities. It was shut down, and the only way they could access care was going to a clinic in San Antonio, which is I think 400 miles. And not only do they have to make that drive, but in Texas there are internal immigration checkpoints like 100 miles into the border. So they would have to put themselves in a position where they would be traveling through an immigration checkpoint internally within Texas to get the care that they needed. Luckily, that clinic was able to reopen during the Supreme Court case and is able to stay open to service that area, but it is the only clinic in South Texas. And that's just on the abortion front. There are communities throughout South Texas that don't have access to any sort of healthcare. And we're passing laws that, make these communities